Hi there, everyone. So first, I just want to apologize to my parents. I had college earlier today and I had to get up kind of early to leave to go to classes. It's a bit of a drive away, and so I'm feeling pretty tired. And the weather has just taken an unexpected uh, turn and got kind of cold. So I'm sort of snuggled up in my big hugget or snugget or whatever you want to call it. So I'm just trying to be comfortable for this video. So yeah, I apologize about all of that, but I'm sure you don't mind. And I thought I'd just do the next video in this series about my thoughts about the Madeleine McCann case. I have a lot that I would potentially like to get through in this video. If I don't get to everything, then I'll just make a third part to this series. But before I get to all of that, I just wanted to make a couple of things clear. I'm not trying to do a deep dive into the case through these videos. Um, the case is incredibly complex and multifaceted, uh, and I think in order to do a really thorough job of that, it would require the kind of time and editing and you know, just in general work that I probably am not able to do and I don't want to do because that's just not really what I'm intending to do with these videos. However, if you would like a very in-depth look at the case and the facts of the case from an alternative perspective and not just the mainstream media perspective, I highly recommend that you go and check out Richard D. Hall's videos about the Madeleine McCann case. I'm going to put a link to his website in the description of this video, and you can just search for Madeleine McCann on the website and it'll bring up the videos he's made. I think there are about 8 or 9 videos about the case so far. And he, you know, does a very good and professional job of exploring the facts of the case. And, you know, you'll get a very, very good summary of the case from his videos. I don't agree with all of his conclusions. He does have a tendency to be very conspiracy theory minded, and that's fine. That's totally okay if you can back up your claims. And as I say, I don't necessarily agree with all of the conclusions that he's come to. I think he does make a few stretches, which doesn't quite, they don't quite sit right with my academic and intellectual thinking. But for an overview of the case, you know, I don't think anyone has done a better job than him. I also recommend Hideho's channel here on YouTube. She has done a brilliant job of putting together a timeline of the case and a lot of the inconsistencies from the witness statements, and I'll link her channel in the description below as well. But basically what I'm trying to do with my videos is not to try and provide a full picture of the case. I think that would just take far too much time. And as I say, others have already done that. What I'm just trying to do with these videos is point out interesting details and facts that have stood out to me personally as I have researched this case. And they're really just meant as kind of starting points for you to go and investigate the case further on your own. They're just meant to be pointers in the right direction if you are looking for where to begin to try and formulate your own theory, or how to begin to maybe question the mainstream media narrative of the case of Madeleine McCann. So I'll provide sources and resources for you to go and check out if you're interested. But as I say, this is really just a few highlights from my point of view, things that I think need to be investigated in more detail if we are to come to some sort of conclusion about what probably happened to Madeleine that night. The final point I just wanted to make also before I get into these thoughts, facts, details, what have you. So the final point I just wanted to make is that I don't obviously know what happened to Madeleine that night. Um, or even if it was that night, there are a number of theories out there. A lot of people in the true crime community and those who've looked into the case who believe that Madeleine died before Thursday, the 3rd of May, 2007, and that the 3rd of May was just when the McCanns raised the alarm that she was missing, but they believe she died before that. I've looked into the evidence that she died earlier than that, and to me it's not compelling enough for me to say that she definitely died before the 3rd of May. There are inconsistencies and details that need to be looked into and investigated a bit more closely, but I can't say for certain that she did die before then. And I also haven't seen anyone present what, for me, a compelling enough argument as to how she died, why she died, what may have actually happened to her that night. So I'm not going to attempt to put forward a scenario of what I definitely think happened to her. I have a general overview of certain aspects of the case that I feel, fairly confident about. But as to how she died, why she died, who the precise people who were involved were, exactly where she died, those are aspects that I don't yet have a theory about, because there just isn't enough evidence. There aren't enough kind of facts and details at our disposal. But I want to point you in the right direction if you want to see if you can maybe formulate a theory. As I say, I have read a number of people's theories so far, and to me, none of them provide compelling enough, arguments and evidence to say that this is most likely what happened to her. I think there are some things we can say with a fair degree of certainty, but we can't know exactly what happened to her, in my opinion. And I think the most honest researchers into the case are those who admit that it really isn't possible to know exactly what happened to her with the evidence that we have available. I mean, for all we know, the police could be holding back evidence that just hasn't been made available to the public that maybe would allow us to come to a pretty good idea of what happened to her. But I don't think with the evidence that we have that, you can actually come to that sort of definite conclusion. But there are a few things that I think I'm fairly confident about when I talk about this case. So without further ado, let's get straight into the facts and details of the case that I want to discuss. I want to pull up a couple of articles and pictures to just help me illustrate what I want to talk about. And I've also got some notes that I want to refer to. There's one last piece of evidence or kind of suggestive information that I do want to talk about, but it's kind of important enough that I think it warrants its own separate video, so I probably will discuss it in a whole separate video. But let's start. I want to start by talking about this article, which is on the Steeple Times, and it does a good job of just giving us a starting point for the aspects that I want to touch on in this video. So let me pull it up here. I'm not going to read the entire article, but I'm just going to point out the aspects that I want to talk about. So the article has a picture of the car hired by the McCanns. Now, for those of you who don't know, 25 days after Madeleine's disappearance, the McCanns hired a rental car. It was a Renault Scenic. So the McCanns stayed in Praia da Luz in Portugal for several months after Madeleine's disappearance. And a few weeks into their, stay after she disappeared, they hired this car, this Renault Scenic. And this car has been at the center of a lot of suspicious and controversial claims in this case. Okay, so the article says the car hired by the McCanns also remains a bit of a mystery. In 2008, it was revealed that one of them had later removed the carpet from the boot compartment in order to scrub it clean. The boot had been left open for several days also. So again, for those of you who don't know, there was a cadaver and blood sniffing dog, or two dogs, a cadaver dog and a blood sniffing dog, that were brought into the crime scene a few weeks into the case, or could have actually even been a couple of months. But the apartment was sort of closed off after Madeleine's disappearance, and I believe there was only one other family that stayed in the apartment after the McCanns had vacated the apartment. But before anyone else came to stay in the apartment, these blood and cadaver sniffing dogs were brought in to see what they could find. Now, their names are Eddie and Keela, and their handler is called Martin Grime. Now, Eddie and Keela and Martin Grime are some of the most highly regarded in their field. Eddie and Keela are amongst the kind of most renowned blood and cadaver sniffing dogs in the world. They have nearly 100% success rate, I believe, when it comes to cases that they've worked on. And their handler, Martin Grimes, is considered to be, an expert dog handler. So he was brought in with his dogs to see what they could find. And the dogs alerted in a few places in the apartment. So I hope I don't get these details wrong, but I'm pretty sure I know, I can remember offhand where they alerted. So the cadaver sniffing dog alerted in the McCann's bedroom, so Jerry and Kate's bedroom, in the wardrobe of Jerry and Kate's bedroom. And also behind, there was a blue sofa in the lounge of the apartment, and the cadaver sniffing dog alerted behind the blue sofa as well. Now, the blood sniffing dog also alerted behind the blue sofa. So that area behind the blue sofa has been a source of a lot of speculation and discussion in this case for obvious reasons. The dogs smelt blood and cadaver in that area, both of them did. And the other place that the cadaver sniffing dog alerted was in the boot or trunk of the Renault Scenic that the McCanns had hired. There were also a few items of clothing and Madeleine's belongings that the dogs alerted to as well. So this is suggestive, and Jerry and Kate have been very quick to write off the dogs as being unreliable, but in general, these dogs in particular are pretty reliable. But then there was also this claim about the McCann's rental car that there was a very strange smell coming from it. So there was a claim from a neighbor who stayed next to the McCanns that the boot of the car had been left open for several days, and that the carpet from the boot compartment had also been removed to scrub it clean. So let's have a look at what the McCanns have to say about that. Right, let's see that you guys can actually see this. I'm just gonna, just bear with me. Okay, so the Madeleine McCann's parents left boot of the hired car open for several days to get rid of the strange smell, claims former detective. So there's the car, and it says, according to a Portuguese detective who led the original investigation into the disappearance of 3-year-old Madeleine McCann, a lawyer who lived next to parents Kate and Jerry McCann's villa in Praia de Luz told authorities she found it strange that the boot of their rental car was left open day and night for several days. Gonzalo Amaral told producers of Maddie, 9.com.au's podcast investigation into the mystery. So I spoke about that podcast in my last video. I highly recommend you go and check it out. That there was a strange and unpleasant smell inside the hired car, a silver Renault Scenic hatchback. Okay. In 2008, two members of the McCann family, both of whom had driven the car, later told British law enforcement the odor was simply due to dirty nappies and trash bags, as well as juices that had leaked from beef and shrimp the family had purchased from a local store. Okay, so the McCanns have claimed that the smell from the car was just purely due to trash that they'd had to take out and groceries from, you know, juices from meat and that sort of thing. But the carpet was scrubbed and the boot was left open day and night. So, you know, I don't know. Tell me what you guys think. Is that serious enough? You know, would the smell from dirty nappies and meat be enough to require the boot to be left open day and night and the carpet to be scrubbed? Especially if this isn't your car, it's a rental car. I don't know. Let me know what you guys think. Police learned that one of them had later removed the carpet from the boot compartment in order to scrub it clean. Amaral detailed in episode 9 of the podcast investigation that a woman had approached Portuguese authorities to explain how she had observed the boot was left open for several days on end. Nobody denied that the car boot had always been open. They said it was because of the smell of garbage, Amaral said. They said it was domestic garbage that was transported in the car boot. Now remember, Gonzalo Amaral was the lead investigator on the case from the Portuguese police. He was the one who was first in charge of the case, and he's the one who believes Kate and Jerry are responsible for what happened to Madeleine. Okay. So Amaral claimed during an interview 2 weeks ago that a German paedophile was being targeted by Operation Grange, the UK police investigation into Madeleine's disappearance, as the man who abducted the girl. However, Amaral said the German was only a scapegoat to shift the focus from the real culprit. I talked about this briefly in my last video, but that's exactly what's happened. We've seen Christian Bruckner has been blamed for Maddie's abduction and murder, but as yet they're struggling to pin the crime on him. I've kind of been keeping an eye on the news, and no compelling evidence has actually been presented to link him to the crime. It's all very circumstantial at this point, and you know, those of us who've looked into the case just don't actually believe that he is responsible. He's kind of like a fall guy. You know, many of us believe. But let me know what you guys think. On May 3rd, the 12th anniversary of Maddie's disappearance, news broke that a foreign paedophile was a new suspect in the case, raising speculation whether that person is the man Amaral was talking about. That said, the car hired by the McCann family for 4 months became the focal point of the police probe in August 2007. Okay, so the hired car was a big source of, as I say, controversy and discussion and suspicion because of these claims about the smell and the fact that the cadaver and blood sniffing dogs alerted to the car. So let's continue with this article. Right, so remember I mentioned both the cadaver and blood sniffing dogs alerted behind the blue sofa in the apartment that the McCanns were staying in. There was also blood spatter found on the wall in that exact same area, and you can see it in this photo here. I hope you can see it. So it was kind of in a spatter pattern. Now I've looked into the blood that was part of this blood spatter, and it was tested by a British forensic lab called FSS, and the results were inconclusive. But if you listen to the Maddie podcast, you will see the interviewer or the journalist who does the podcast, Mark Sinokonoko, interviews a leading DNA analysis expert called Mike Perlin, I believe his name is. And he has really, really cutting edge technology and algorithms to analyze DNA evidence. And according to him, the methods that the British forensic lab was using to analyze the DNA from the apartment back in 2007, 2008 was extremely primitive. It was very basic, really. And like, if you listen to the interview with him, it was kind of almost inevitable that the results were going to come back inconclusive. But Mike Perlin's lab, which is in America, is much more advanced in analyzing DNA evidence. And he has offered to analyze the DNA evidence that was collected from the apartment. There was DNA evidence collected from the apartment and also from the McCann's hired car. And Mike Perlin has offered to analyze that DNA evidence using his more advanced analysis for free. He's made this offer to Operation Grange, which is the British police. That's the name of the British police investigation into Maddie's disappearance. So Mike Perlin has offered to analyze the DNA evidence, saying, okay, I can offer you a much more accurate answer about whose DNA this is. And Operation Grange have completely refused to respond to his offer. And this is the cause for great kind of anger, and it's caused a huge uproar in the true crime community, those of us who are invested in this case. Why would you not want to take up someone's offer, especially if it's pro bono, if it's completely free? They're offering you a more advanced way of analyzing the DNA evidence. Why would you not agree to that? And I think, the more you look into this case, the more you can see that the British authorities are really very biased in the McCann's favor, which is something I mentioned in the last video. So the article says, more significantly, shared on the Complete Mystery of Madeleine McCann Facebook page last month is this photograph illustrating the distribution of blood spots in the sitting room of the holiday apartment where the McCann family was staying in Praia da Luz, Portugal, in May 2007. Elsewhere, analysis of the setting highlights the tiles in the room were later removed by persons unknown. Okay, so they pulled up the tiles just to see what, whether they could find trace DNA in the tiles. I don't know what they came back with, but from what I can tell from looking at the FSS report, any DNA that was found in the apartment was kind of proved to be inconclusive through the methods that the FSS used to analyze it. So it'd be really, really interesting to know what would be found if that DNA was run through much more advanced, technology and methods like the kind that Mike Perlin has. True Allele, that's the name of his lab, Mike Perlin, True Allele. So go and check them out if you're interested in the work that they're doing. Okay, so let's now look at, this is an interesting aspect that I did want to touch on in this video. Questions still without answers. Many questions about what happened on the evening of the disappearance of Madeleine McCann remain. Some that have been highlighted by the press and discussed online include: why did Kate McCann refuse to answer 48 questions put to her by the Portuguese police? Okay, so you can actually have a look at the 48 questions that were put to Kate McCann by the police in the McCann PJ files that are online. So as I mentioned in my last video, the Portuguese police published their whole case file online once they had archived the case, and you can actually see all the questions that they asked Kate McCann, and she refused to answer every single one of them. Now, a lot has been made of her refusal to answer the questions. There's obviously it's raised a lot of eyebrows, and that's a whole rabbit hole you could go down on your own, and you can come to your own conclusions about that. But for me, one of the questions that was asked that I found particularly interesting, just simply because of my own theories about why this could have happened to Madeleine. One of the questions was about whether it was true that the McCanns had explored handing over custody of Madeleine to a family member. I thought this was a fascinating question. Apparently the Portuguese police did ask Kate McCann this question. Now, I think they must have had some kind of reason or facts that they were working on, or some kind of details that they knew which caused them to answer this question. It's kind of a weird or unusual question to ask unless you actually have a good reason for asking it. So I think, to me, it suggests, and I'm obviously not stating this as fact, I don't know. This is all just my own theory and allegations, really, but to me it suggests that Kate and Jerry McCann were having problems with Madeleine of some sort. Kate McCann described Madeleine's behavior as a bit difficult in the book that she wrote about Madeleine. She describes Madeleine as a little bit of a difficult child who used to scream and cry a lot. And then we have this question that the Portuguese police asked her about: did you explore giving up custody of Madeleine to a family member? So it's interesting, isn't it? That clearly, I'm not saying Kate and Jerry didn't love her. I don't want to be unfair to them. Small children can be challenging sometimes, especially if they have behavioral, difficulties, if they're hard to maybe cope with. But to me, it just simply suggests that they were having difficulties with Madeleine. Then the article goes on to say, why were certain records of phone calls on the evening of the disappearance whoosh clunked from the memories of the phones of Mr. and Mrs. McCann and the Tapas 9? So I mentioned this in my last video, but multiple phone calls and text messages were deleted off the phones of not only Kate and Jerry, but their 7 friends as well that they were on holiday with. And this was picked up. The Portuguese police could obviously pick it up because they could tell where the cell phone towers were pinging off the phones. And there's one particular phone call from Jerry's phone that was particularly interesting because the Portuguese police weren't able to identify who it was that Jerry spoke to. And that's what I want to talk about in my next video. I'm not going to do it here because it kind of warrants its own discussion. But yeah, I think that's very interesting. Why would you feel the need to delete lots of data off your phone if you have nothing to hide, if you're simply, the worried parents and friends of a missing child? Photos also seem to have been deleted off people's phones. The Portuguese police could find very few holiday photos on the phones of the Tapas 9, particularly around the time that Madeleine was supposed to have gone missing. there is only a handful of photos of Madeline that have been made available to the public from that holiday. And one of those is one we're going to look at in this video. Okay, so why did a British sniffer dog supposedly sense the smell of a corpse in a vehicle hired by the couple a month after the disappearance of their daughter? Okay, so we've looked at that. Kate and Jerry blame the smell on garbage and food that supposedly leaked into the boot, but we know that they went to a great deal of effort to clean the boot of the car. Why did Mr. and Mrs. McCann go jogging and play tennis in the days after their daughter's disappearance? For me, this is absolutely bizarre and baffling. I mean, I don't have children, and so I've obviously never lost a child. And I wouldn't want to kind of try to imagine how I might act or respond if I was in that situation. But I can tell you that I lost a family member who I was extremely close to, earlier in my life. And for the first few weeks, I've never been the same since I lost this person. And those couple of weeks directly after this person's death, so it was my brother that I lost. And the couple of weeks after his death, I was a shell of myself. I mean, as I say, like, I've actually never been the same since. And I don't even want to say in terms of getting over it, because I don't think I've ever actually got over his death. But the idea of being normal in the days and weeks after his death was incomprehensible to me. And for me, the idea of Kate and Jerry, of parents of a missing child, kind of having a good time in the days after their daughter's disappearance is just bizarre. Obviously, it's done absolutely nothing to endear them to the public. The public have criticized them very harshly for that, and I can understand why. It just seems incredibly cold and unfeeling, but it's also just unfathomable to me. I don't know, like, the pain, the emotional pain and grief would surely prevent you from doing that. I don't know. I just can't imagine it. Was it acceptable for Mr. and Mrs. McCann's mortgage to be paid by the fund established to search for their missing daughter? So as I mentioned in the last video, there are a lot of strange kind of facts surrounding the Madeleine McCann Fund, which is a limited liability not-for-profit company and not a charity, by the way, just in case you were wondering. It's not a charity, it's a limited liability not-for-profit company. And the trustees of the fund have been incredibly vague and cagey about providing details of how the money was used. And this is a claim I've seen made, that some of the money was used to pay Kate and Jerry's mortgage, which, if it's true, really, really does not look good. Okay, so that was that article. Now I just want to go over to my notes, and so bear with me. Just want to make sure I cover everything. Okay, so some of the aspects that I just wanted to cover, things that just stood out to me, as I say. Kate, this is just something that I noticed because I'm just kind of a verbal person, and I notice words. But Kate and Jerry and their family members and friends have used very similar wording when talking about aspects of the case, almost like they've been coached to say certain things. And in fact, we know that they've been coached about what to say to the media and, in interviews. Their personal representative, Terrence Mitchell, has pretty much admitted that Kate and Jerry have been heavily coached about how to respond to the media and how to act in interviews. But we see very, very similar wording even in the immediate aftermath of Madeleine's disappearance. So we see both Kate and Jerry and family members of the McCanns using wording like, it was similar to having dinner in your garden, when they talk about leaving the children alone in the apartment. I thought that was interesting. It's kind of a strange phrase to use, similar to having dinner in your garden, and yet we hear it come up over and over again, almost like they've all agreed on the wording that they're going to use. The other thing we hear a lot is that the window had been jimmied open. So initially, Kate and Jerry claimed that Madeleine had been abducted out of the window of the bedroom where the children were sleeping. And the window actually has this very heavy shutter on the outside of it. I want to see if I can maybe pull up a photo of the shutter. Maybe not this time. I'll in my next video I'll pull up a picture of the shutter. But it was shown to have been absolutely impossible, pretty much, for Madeleine to have been kidnapped out of that window. The window, I've seen pictures of the outside of the wall. The window is really high off the, from the distance between the street to the window is very high. You wouldn't really have been able to get out of that window carrying a small child. Certainly not without waking her, certainly not without like putting a ladder or something up to the window to get out. The window itself was extremely narrow as well. It was 1/2 meter. So to squish out of there, and for an adult to squish out of there carrying a small child, not possible really, especially not without waking her and, for her to cry. But aside from that, the shutter that was on the outside of the window, so it was like a rolled shutter that was on the outside of the window, that it wasn't possible to open it from the outside. You had to open it from the inside, and it wasn't tampered with at all, which it would have had to been to get it open to get through the window. And initially Kate and Jerry said that's how Madeleine was taken, but it was found to have been impossible for that to have happened, really. Like, it just wasn't possible for her to have been taken out through that way. But they used this wording, the window had been jimmied open, and all the family members and friends used the same wording, the window had been jimmied open, as if they'd discussed that that's what they were going to say, like that was their story. The next thing I just want to talk about, which again, it goes back to Kate and Jerry's behavior and their demeanor after Madeleine disappeared. They did not join in the physical search for Madeleine. Now, to me, again, this is incomprehensible. All I know, and I mean, it's difficult in a situation like this. You don't want to say that you know exactly how you would respond, or that you could possibly know how Kate and Jerry were feeling or why they did what they did. But if it were me, I would not be able to sleep, knowing that someone I loved was out there, much less my child. I cannot imagine a good justification for Kate and Jerry not physically going out and searching themselves. They didn't. They let the police and other people at the Ocean Club Resort and members of the public go and search for Madeleine that night that she supposedly disappeared. But they didn't go out and search themselves. They've defended this, saying that they were working behind the scenes and getting in touch with people, to get the
things moving, but that they didn't feel like there was any point in them going out and searching. And I just want to point out in the true crime cases that I have looked at personally, in my interest in, true crime cases, this seems to be a common denominator that we see with family members who are guilty when it comes to what has happened to their loved one, is that they will not actually join in the search for that person. Initially, when the person is ruled missing or having, disappeared, the family member who ultimately turns out to be responsible doesn't join in the search. And this is what we see with Kate and Jerry. And I know it looks like I'm pointing the finger, but I cannot imagine why parents of a missing child would not be out there physically searching themselves. They actually went to bed and got some sleep that night. Probably not very much, but they did sleep that night whilst other people were searching through the night for Madeleine. So I cannot imagine. Another aspect, interesting little tidbit that doesn't get spoken about a lot, is Robert Murat, who was initially a suspect in this case. The Portuguese police had 3 suspects that they investigated initially. It was Kate and Jerry, the parents, and then Robert Murat, who was a British expat who lived just down the road from the Ocean Club. And I still don't really know what his involvement in the case was. I can't help but feel that he was involved somehow, but I don't really know how. There isn't enough evidence to suggest how he might have been involved in this case. But the Portuguese police believed he had some connection to the case, and they were tipped off by a British journalist. And again, as I say, there just hasn't been enough evidence that's been made available to show how he was involved. I kind of have a theory that he might have helped the McCanns, if the McCanns were responsible for what happened to Madeleine, and I believe they were, I think he might have helped the McCanns and their friends to dispose of Madeleine's body somehow. I don't even like to say those words. I can't bear to think of it, this little girl. But I think that is my theory of how he was involved. So when Jerry McCann was asked by journalists, does he know Robert Murat? He just said, I'm not going to answer that question, and he abruptly ended the interview and walked away. There's footage of that. I'm not going to show it, but you can find it. So Jerry McCann just refused to answer the question about whether or not he knew Robert Murat, who's very, very defensive when asked about that. And if you watch Richard D. Hall's documentaries, he mentions that Robert Murat's phone number was found in the phone of Russell O'Brien, who was one of the Tapas 9. So Russell O'Brien, one of the McCann's friends that was on the holiday with them, had Robert Murat's phone number in his phone, even though most of the Tapas 9 claimed, most of them who were asked claimed that they didn't know Robert Murat. And yet clearly that wasn't true, because Russell O'Brien had his phone number. So Russell O'Brien at least must have had some kind of connection to him. And he's never divulged what that connection actually is. So that's another thing I'd love to have the answer to. If you go and watch Hideho's video, she points out a lot of contradictions in the stories of the Tapas 9 about the events of the day that Madeleine disappeared. And I'm not going to go into those because you can go and watch her video. But for me, something that was really interesting was the contradiction between Kate and Jerry's accounts of the evening of Thursday, the 3rd of May. Obviously the night that Madeleine was supposed to have gone missing. So you would think that those events would be pretty clear in their minds, but even Kate and Jerry can't agree on some of the most basic details. For example, Kate says she went for a jog on the beach that evening, but Jerry says they played tennis together and then went together to the tapas area to have dinner with the children, whereas Kate says she met them there. Also, David Payne came and visited the McCann's apartment, and there are differing accounts of how long he spent there. David and Jerry seem to suggest that he spent about half an hour with Kate and the children, whereas Kate says he was only at their apartment for 30 seconds. So, you know, there are these contradictions that we just don't really know what's happened. So, oh, I'm sorry, it's getting a little bit dark here, but I'm going to wrap up soon. The last aspect I just wanted to talk about before I bring this video to a close is a photo. There are a lot of peculiar things with the photos of Madeleine that were released to the public by the McCanns, but I specifically wanted to focus on this photo because I actually want to know what you guys think of it. So let's bring up this photo. As I told you, there were only a handful of photos that were made available to the public from the holiday. Apparently, there were only really a few photos that existed. And this photo is one of them. It's Madeleine on the day that she was supposed to have played tennis with the kids club that she was a part of. You know, so the McCanns dropped their kids off at a kids club every day. Like I told you, they didn't really spend that much time with them. And one of the activities that was organized for Madeleine's group was for them to go and play tennis on one of the days. According to the kids club records, it was on the Tuesday. And this photo was taken supposedly of Madeleine when she was playing tennis. Now, there are a few things about this photo that are odd to me. And just tell me if you agree. The first thing that stands out to me is Madeleine was 3 years old, nearly 4. She was a few days away from her 4th birthday. But she was a small child. I mean, think about children that you know who are 3 or 4 years old. Does this photo look like a 3-year-old, nearly 4-year-old little girl to you? To me, it doesn't. I know what a 3-year-old child looks like, and their legs are not this long and lanky. This child looks like they're in a major growth spurt that's more consistent with a child of maybe 5 or 6, in my opinion. If you look at the legs and the knees, you can see that a lot of growing is happening. The legs are too long to be a child of 3 going on 4, in my opinion. The arms as well. It's just, you know, this is a child who is starting to lose their baby fat and, you know, and having a growth spurt. And children of 3 are too young for that. The other thing which suggests to me that this child is actually older than Madeleine would have been is she's holding, you know, real adult tennis balls. Now, I had lots of tennis lessons when I was growing up. My parents were both huge tennis enthusiasts, and they sent us to tennis lessons every single Saturday. And when I was little, and for quite a while, we were only allowed to play with those soft foam tennis balls. And we weren't allowed to play with adult tennis balls until we were like, gosh, I can't remember what age it was, but it was maybe at least kind of 9 or 10. And that's because those tennis balls, if you get hit with them, they're quite firm and hard. And if you get hit with one of those tennis balls, it can hurt you. And they're too kind of rough for a child of Madeline's age. I would be really, really surprised if the kids club organized an activity for children who are that small with proper adult tennis balls. Um, yeah, it just, to me, there's been speculation that Madeline's face was photoshopped onto the body of an older child, because this photo does not look like a 3 or 4 year old child. It looks like an older child. I also cross referenced this photo with another photo of Madeline on the tennis court, and the shorts are also different. Um, so there is another photo of what does look like Madeline on the tennis court, and her shorts are different. Now, I'm not saying that Madeline couldn't have changed, that they couldn't have changed her shorts, but to me, it just doesn't look like a 3 or 4 year old child. It looks like an older child to me. And why are the McCanns potentially resorting to photoshopping photos of her on this holiday? I don't know. Um, and why are there so few photos of Madeline from the holiday in general? Like, what is the reason for that? I mean, you would think if this was this happy, idyllic family holiday that there would have been a good number of photos taken. I mean, they had phones back in this was 2007. Phones would have definitely been capable of taking photos at that stage. I think, or at least I know they had a digital they definitely had a digital camera. Why are there so few photos of Madeline, and why are the photos that there are kind of so strange? There are no balls on the tennis court either. You would think, when there are children playing tennis, there are kind of balls everywhere, because, kids are knocking the balls around and not always being able to hit the ball. So there's generally balls all over the show. I'm not saying that that's definitely something to be suspicious about, but just something to notice. There's no sign of any other child around. I don't know. I think this photo is weird. Let me know what you think. And I will be back with another video just describing more of my thoughts on this case. And in the meantime, I would love to hear what you think. Let me know what you found out. If you can point me to any more sources, I'll leave a few more sources that you can check out in the description of this video. And until next time, take care and have a lovely evening. Bye.